US President Donald Trump has claimed that immediate ceasefire in India and Pakistan conflict to take place. Now, in his latest Truth Social, Trump has claimed, and I'm quoting him here for our viewers, after a long night of talks mediated by the United States, I am pleased to announce that India and Pakistan have agreed to a full and immediate ceasefire. Congratulations to both countries on using common sense and great intelligence. Thank you for your attention to this matter. However, India's statement is yet to come on this matter. And to get more on this, we're being joined by our Assistant Editor for Foreign Affairs, Siddhant Sibbal, live on the phone line. Siddhant, you've just mentioned to us that the briefing could bring in more updates. But for now, this is a major statement that is a welcome, it's a pleasant situation for both the countries. And how do we perceive this?
Well, a significant statement from Donald Trump. Of course, there is no comment on the Indian side, but that's perhaps because there is a briefing that's going to start in next 15 minutes, that is for sure. So we'll get to the more details on that, but right now the big breaking story is coming is that Donald Trump has announced this development. All in all, the focus, of course, is that how there can be less tension in the region. We're also waiting for more details coming in terms of how this entire development was achieved. We know that the U.S. Secretary of State had spoken to the Pakistani Army Chief earlier today. He had spoken to the Minister of Affairs, Something as well. And the focus from the American side was for a long time that there should be a reduction. We saw the White House statement as well yesterday, where the White House spokesperson said that the president would like this case to de-escalate. So all in all, the focus has been largely to de-escalate as early as possible. Now we are entering into the foreign history, so we will get to know the official Indian reaction very soon.
Right, Siddhant, this is a major development, and the peace which has been brokered by the United States, it's a pleasant surprise for both the countries. And while we're dealing with that, could you also tell us what this de-escalation could look like in the coming hours, and have there been any reactions that have come in from either side or the United States on this matter?
Well, Pakistan, of course, has reacted that there is going to be a de-escalation very soon. Largely, we know that the only India's statement is awaited, but this is something of a significant development, given the fact that India is able to achieve its objectives. India, of course, had made the strike in Pakistan against the terror camp, and since then India has been saying that it wants to de-escalate. It was Pakistan that was indulging in the escalation of the situation.
Right, and Siddhant, we understand that Secretary of State Marco Rubio has also commented on this situation. Can you just briefly take us through that as well?
Well, yes, the U.S. Secretary of State has also confirmed that the development. So we will get to know more reaction as the day progresses. In the shop, it's not a foreign ministry is going to react. So we're just going in the briefing room right now.
Right, this is a major development. We're seeing that the US President Donald Trump has claimed immediate ceasefire in the India-Pakistan conflict. In his Truth Social post, Trump has claimed, and we're quoting him here, that after a long night of talks mediated by the United States, I am pleased to announce that India and Pakistan have agreed to a full and immediate ceasefire. Congratulations to both the countries for using common sense and great intelligence. Thank you for your attention to this matter. This is what the President of the United States had to say. This is, of course, a major development, as we've seen that both the sides have been engaged in an aggressive combat given the last few days after the Pahalgam terror attack, which happened on 22nd of April. Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said that over the past 48 hours, Vice President Vance and he have engaged in talks with senior Indian and Pakistani officials, including the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, and The Prime Minister of Pakistan, Shehbaz Sharif, along with External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, Chief of Army Staff Asim Munir, and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and Asim Malik. Well, this is the latest development, and the US President Donald Trump has claimed an immediate ceasefire in India and Pakistan conflict through a Truth Social post. Pakistan and India have agreed to a ceasefire with immediate effect. Pakistan has always strived for peace and security in the region without compromising on its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Once again, for our viewers, Pakistan Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar has said, and we're quoting him here, Pakistan and India have agreed to a ceasefire with immediate effect. Pakistan has always strived for peace and security in the region without compromising on its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Now, this tweet has come after we've heard from the US President Donald Trump, who has said that a ceasefire has been imposed with immediate effect between India and Pakistan after the conflict, which is going on for days now. In news that's just coming in, we've also heard from the other side. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar has said that Pakistan and India have agreed to a ceasefire with immediate effect. Pakistan has always strived for peace and security in the region without compromising on its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And this has come after US President Donald Trump has claimed immediate ceasefire in India and Pakistan conflict. He has said in his Truth Social post, where Trump has claimed, and we're quoting him here, that after a long night of talks mediated by the United States, I am pleased to announce that India and Pakistan have agreed to a full and immediate ceasefire. Congratulations to both the countries on using common sense and great intelligence. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, we've also heard reactions coming in from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, along with comments coming from the Pakistani side, where we heard from Ishaq Dar, who has said that they welcomed the peace brokered by the United States. And to go over the comment which has come from the Pakistani side, Pakistan Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar has said that Pakistan and India have agreed to a ceasefire with immediate effect. Pakistan has always strived for peace and security in the region without compromising on its sovereignty and territorial integrity. While we heard from the United States, we've heard from US President Donald Trump, along with reactions from Marco Rubio, and now from the Pakistani side. We are yet to hear from the Indian side.
Right, Diksha, this of course is a big moment because no one was expecting that there would of course be a ceasefire in this manner. But Donald Trump, out of the blue, because remember the messaging that was coming in from the Americans was actually fairly mixed. Just day before yesterday, J.D. Vance, he had said that the India-Pakistan conflict is none of the American business. And what we are looking at is very different and pretty stark from what was being said by the earlier American leaders. Now, Donald Trump putting out that tweet stating that both nations have agreed for a ceasefire. And this is also interesting because the Pakistanis, remember, till yesterday, the Khwaja officer, the defense minister of Pakistan, he had said that Pakistan has no other option apart from going in for an all-out war with India. But what we are looking at, the Pakistani foreign minister Ishaq Dar, he has now said that Pakistan and India have mutually agreed for a ceasefire starting at 4:30 p.m. local time. And
right,
they've agreed
Mr.
to
Saleh.
it.
And we had seen very mixed reactions coming in from the United States, where we heard from the US president that it will mediate a peace efforts between India and Pakistan. But then we heard from Vice President J.D. Vance, who has said that the conflict is none of United States concerns. And then we went on to Marco Rubio, who has again reiterated the US efforts to broker a peace. And now with the latest statement that's come in from the United States President Donald Trump, that a peace has been brokered and is going to be in effect immediately. It is a major development.
Right. You know, but we have to still wait and watch as to what the Indian response to this, because there cannot be ceasefire only from one end. The Pakistanis now seem to be on board with this American idea that there will be a ceasefire. They're saying that Pakistan was just only responding, but now we need to wait and watch as to what the Indian side has to say. And also, Marco Rubio has also put out a tweet, and this is interesting. He claims in his tweet that over the past 48 hours, the Vice President and I have engaged with senior Indian and Pakistani officials, including with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Shehbaz Sharif, the External Affairs Minister Subramaniam, and the Pakistani External Affairs Minister as well. And this is what Marco Rubio is putting out in his tweet, where he says, I'm pleased to announce that the governments of India and Pakistan have agreed to an immediate ceasefire and to start talks on a broad set of issues, utter neutral side. But considering what was happening in the last 48 hours, you know, not many people expected that there would be a ceasefire. We were seeing the two nations go up the escalatory ladder, and this is pretty interesting that the American side, and this is coming firstly from the American side, not from the Indian side yet. We need to wait and watch as to what the Indians, of course, have to say. And
we're also hearing more from the Pakistan Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar, where he said that Pakistan and India have mutually agreed for a ceasefire starting 4:30 p.m.
Right.
And we only retaliated, but war is no solution, and we will respond if challenged.
Absolutely, indeed. And joining us on the broadcast, we've got Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, who's a former Indian diplomat and distinguished fellow at WIF. Ambassador Trigunayat, your first reaction, sir, on this tweet that's been put out by Donald Trump, where he said that the United States has been talking to the two nations and India and Pakistan have agreed to a ceasefire.
Well, I think it's a welcome move, and India has, from the very beginning, after retaliating against that horrible and heinous attacks of April 22nd, had very clearly told that after attacking these 9 terror hideouts, we did not want any further escalation. But Pakistan chose a very different path, and they continued to retaliate and create more and more problem and destabilization instead of taking any action against the terrorists or terror. So therefore, India was not interested in taking the war to the next level. But it happened, and we had to retaliate all along. And so this has been our stand from the very beginning. At the same time, I think that the root cause of terrorism needs to be addressed.
To this understanding, the Directors General of Military Operations will talk again on the 12th of May at 1200 hours. Thank you.
All right, so this of course is the big development of the hour. India and Pakistan have agreed to a ceasefire. This is what the American President Donald Trump has said, that there is going to be a full and an immediate ceasefire starting 4:30 p.m. local time, India and Pakistan. Now, it remains to be seen as to what really is the fine print of this. Now, let's make it, you know, if you're just joining us, this is a big development that has just come in, where the American side seems to have mediated. The American president reportedly he's of course put out this tweet, and Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance reportedly were in conversation with the Indian leadership and the Pakistani leadership. And it now remains to be seen as to what exactly happened here, because looking at what was happening in the last 48 hours, it did appear that this war was quite clearly on an escalatory ladder. But now things we need to see as to how things play out on the ground. Ishaq Dar has changed his tune. Pakistan has now changed his tune. Till yesterday, the Pakistani defense minister had been stating that an all-out war is the only option that the Pakistanis have. But Ishaq Dar, their foreign minister, is now stating that Pakistan does not want...
Following that, as you know, there will be a briefing by my colleagues from the military. The Director General of Military Operations of Pakistan called the Director General of Military Operations of India at 15:35 hours earlier this afternoon. It was agreed between them that both sides would stop all firing and military action on land and in the air and sea with effect from 1700 hours Indian Standard Time today. Instructions have been given on both sides to give effect to this understanding. The Directors General of Military Operations will talk again on the 12th of May at 1200 hours. Thank you.
All right. So this is caused the big announcement there. Vikram Misri stating that from 1700 hours Indian Standard Time, in the aftermath of the conversation that was had with the American officials, India and Pakistan have agreed for a ceasefire. And this is big development where the fighting, one assumes, has now come to an end. At 1700 hours, that's roughly about an hour ago, the war that had in fact been escalating, the conflict that had been escalating, there is a ceasefire at this moment that has been agreed upon both by India and Pakistan. We were waiting for that confirmation from the Indian side, and this is the big confirmation. Vikram Misri stating quite clearly that there was a call at 3:58 with the American officials, and it was agreed upon that both India and Pakistan will stop firing. This is something that's come straight out of the blue because the American position had been fairly ambivalent. The American vice president had said that the India-Pakistan conflict is none of the American business. And now what we are seeing is that this is an American-mediated ceasefire. The Americans seem to have leaned on the Pakistanis and have made the Pakistanis see some sense in the clear escalation that the Pakistanis had been resorting to. The tune that's also coming in from Pakistan is very different. Yesterday evening, we heard from the Pakistani Defense Minister Khwaja Asif, who insisted that it is only an all-out war that will now probably be the only way that Pakistan will now take this forward. But Ishaq Dar, the foreign minister of Pakistan, he has now put out a tweet stating that Pakistan does not want a war and that it was only retaliating. And now what we have is a ceasefire that has been come into effect, but we need to see as to how long this ceasefire, of course, will last. Will Pakistan again try violate the ceasefire? What are the modalities? What are the clauses? The fine print of this agreement is yet to come. But this, of course, is the big breaking development of the moment. India and Pakistan, through American mediation, have agreed to a ceasefire. The ceasefire has come into effect at 1700 hours. That is 5 p.m. Indian Standard Time. And it is 1800 hours now. So the ceasefire is now in its very first hour. And it has held on for so far. Now, this is a big breaking development. I'll be joined by my colleague Siddhant Sibal in just a bit, who was, of course, there at the presser, and he'll be getting us more details on this. We'll also be getting you some expert opinion on what would have made the Pakistanis see some sense. And let's first listen in again to Vikram Misri. They're announcing that India and Pakistan have both agreed to a ceasefire.
Military Operations of Pakistan called the Director General of Military Operations of India at 15:35 hours earlier this afternoon. It was agreed between them that both sides would stop all firing and military action on land and in the air and sea with effect from 1700 hours Indian Standard Time today. Instructions have been given on both sides to give effect to this understanding. The Directors General of Military Operations will talk again on the 12th of May at 1200 hours. Thank you.
All right, so India and Pakistan have agreed to stop all military action from land, air and sea. And this has come after a long night of talks, is what is being said about. Remember, the tweet by Donald Trump is what has, of course, brought this as a complete bit of a surprise, because no one was expecting that there would be a ceasefire this evening. But what we are now looking at is a situation where the Americans seem to have leaned in on the Pakistanis. A lot of people were even questioning the kind of leverage that the Americans perhaps may have on the Pakistanis, because remember, Pakistan has been slowly but steadily moving away from the American weapons and military hardware. It is using more and more of the Chinese military hardware, which is what it had been using in this war so far. And the fact that the Pakistanis have now agreed for a ceasefire is very interesting. The circumstances and also what has in fact gone behind the scenes in these negotiations is also going to be very, very interesting. The American position earlier had been very ambivalent. The Americans had been saying that this war is none of their business because in the past, the Americans have used the leverage that they've had on the Pakistanis in terms of the military aid that they send the Pakistanis, in terms of the financial aid that the Americans have backed the Pakistanis with, which is what had made Islamabad be more pliable to American talk and negotiations. And this time round, it is the Americans who seem to have leaned on the Pakistanis to make them see some sense. What was sparked off by that unfortunate and that bizarre statement by General Asim Munir of bringing back the idea of that, the debunked idea and flawed idea of a two-nation theory, which then a week later we witnessed the Pahalgam terror attack, and from then on this conflict had been steadily escalating towards a full-blown war. But what we are now witnessing is a ceasefire which both India and Pakistan have agreed upon. And the ceasefire has been in effect since 1700 hours local time. So India has agreed to a ceasefire. And we are also told that the Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif will be addressing the nation pretty shortly. And India has decided that any future act of terror will, of course, be treated as an act of war. And these are some of the issues that we'll, of course, be talking about, because this is pretty big. India has decided that any future act of war will be considered and will be seen as tantamount to an act of war. And Ambassador Anil Trigunath is back with us. Ambassador, we were just speaking to you a little while back before we heard that statement by Vikram Misri, the Indian Foreign Secretary there. India and Pakistan have agreed to a ceasefire. And what, in your assessment, has resulted in this? What do you think has been said to the Pakistanis that has made to see the Pakistanis some sense?
We had taken out 9 of these hideouts, but in that India had very clearly said we did not want any escalation further, and from our side it was done. But the Pakistan chose a very different path. It retaliated. It wanted to also further enhance the intensity of the warfare, which has been seen in the last 3-4 days. But they have been totally annihilated as far as the reports are there. So I think that there was, at the same time, of course, India did not want a war. We don't want a war. And the Americans and the whole world has been asking for de-escalation. As you have seen, this morning there was also a statement from the G7. Then President Trump initially, in my view, what he said was that I know they've been fighting and it's up to them and all. I think that was also, in my view, was their way of telling us that if you want to sort out the terrorists, you can do that. I mean, then they know India's reservations and concerns insofar as terrorism is concerned, and we believe in the zero terror policy. And so hopefully with this ceasefire, which has actually been prevailing since 2021, I mean, in fact, you'll see that under the same 2003 agreement, we have been having ceasefire, and that's why the talks were held between the DGMOs. And the Pakistani DGMO called when Marco Rubio spoke to General Asim Munir. And Asim Munir, who has been instrumental in this whole thing in the first place, and he's the only person who could have called for truce from their side. And so I'm happy that this has been done. But at that same time, it is extremely important for us to remain watchful, because the root cause of this ceasefire, whatever it is there, root cause of this issue is still very much there. How Pakistan is going to behave and take action against the terror groups. They have agreed in Lahore Declaration, they have agreed in different agreements that they will not allow their territory to be used against India. But their cross-border terrorism policy has continued unabated for a long time. So I think during the discussions that will be held going forward, this will have to be watched. And if the Americans can guarantee that, I doubt very much so, but if they can guarantee it, then nothing like it. I mean, everybody wants peace, and more than anybody else, India wants peace.
Indeed, India, of course, wants peace, and the only reason why India retaliated to these Pakistanis' acts of aggression is because of these gruesome acts of terror that are backed from the forces on the other sides of the border. And Ambassador, I want you to weigh in on this very interesting, this very interesting principle that's now been put forth, where the government of India has now said, this is according to sources, that any future act of terror backed by the Pakistanis perpetrated on Indian soil will be seen as an act of war. What's your assessment of this?
I think that, you have to sort out the terrorists. I mean, Pakistan itself claims that it's suffering from it. But as you know, the story of Basmasur, I mean, if they are getting paid by the same terrorists that they have nurtured, it is their problem. But at the same time, they've been using these terrorists against India and against Afghanistan in the past, and it's been known to everybody in the world. And the United States of all the countries has been in the know of things. So what India is saying is that for us, that once again, if there are terror attacks like these, I mean, that will be just without any warning or anything, you can have this war. Right now, none of the sides has so far declared war openly, even though there have been fighting going on the border, and cross-shelling and attacks have been going on, utilizing Pakistani assets and all that. That's been our strategy so far. But it will be retaliatory in that sense. And both sides have been claiming that they retaliated against the other. But therefore, then we can have a unilateral action going forward if that be the case. Hopefully not. Let Pakistan have some sense.
Indeed, that of course is true. Now, the fact that, the government of India sources put out that India has decided that any future act of terror will be treated as an act of war. Do you think this will now deter the Pakistanis from backing their terror factories, from staging attacks on India? And the fact that the Pakistanis have agreed to a ceasefire, one assumes, on the basis of this condition that I'm pretty sure would have been made known to the Pakistanis. Do you think the Pakistani deep state will now change its tune?
I think the proof of pudding will be in eating. So we'll have to wait and watch and see how they behave eventually. Personally, I don't have great faith in it.
And also, considering as to how the Pakistanis were talking till yesterday, Khwaja Asif, the defense minister, had been saying that this is the only option, that the Pakistanis have an all-out war. But what Ishaq Dar, the foreign minister, has been saying today is very different, where he said that Pakistan and India have mutually agreed for a ceasefire starting at 4:30 p.m. We only retaliated. Ishaq Dar says that he only retaliated. War is no solution, but we will respond if challenged. The fact that the Pakistani foreign minister is now saying that war is no solution and we only retaliated, what do you think has changed? I mean, what has made the Pakistanis see some sense?
In my view, the Pakistani has seen how India has responded, how there has been a global condemnation of terrorism in that sense, in which Pakistan were directly or indirectly associated, even by their friends. So they are not getting much of a support from many countries in that sense. That's number one. The economy cannot sustain it. They have seen how India played out at the IMF also, even though we abstained. But at the same time, they do understand that India's heft and a righteous cause, frankly. Pakistan itself claims all the time, whenever we say that you are indulging in terrorism, then they'll go out to the world crying that we are suffering from terrorism. Now, who has created that? I mean, that is something that is there. So that was just a statement. Although, if you remember, that Khwaja Asif also himself had once or twice said that, we are willing to go back if India is going to go back. So there have been signals coming in. But this afternoon, when the talks with the DGMOs, and I think that the decider in this whole thing was Asim Munir, who basically was talked to by Rubio. And then he must have pressured him or whatever, or he realized his limitations, that he can't go beyond. Instead of a complete military defeat, it is better to go in for a ceasefire, or not a new ceasefire, rather a ceasefire that has been existing, to reinforce that. And new terms and conditions must be agreed by both sides. Pakistan once again will tell us that, okay, we will not allow anything from our territory, and they'll have this kind of proxies continue to work. So we'll have to see how they really go forward. I mean, personally, having observed them for the last four decades, I don't have a great faith. But at the same time, let's see if they can change their behavior.
That's an interesting comment that you made. Now, Pakistan tries to play good cop, bad cop. The civilian establishment says one thing, the defense establishment says completely another. The fact that this ceasefire has now been announced, do you think the military establishment in Pakistan is on board for the ceasefire?
Yes, it is done by them only. You see, in Pakistan, there is no political establishment. That's a mirage. It does not exist. There may be a prime minister, there may be a president, there may be anybody or whatever institutions, but they all work at the behest of the army. Army is the establishment there. So if the army general has agreed, who is also having a problem against him because his own colleagues are not happy with him, the country was not happy with them. So I think that he has to first sort out his domestic situation as well. And they always try to create this bogey of India and just to generate the public opinion. And he has seen what has happened, how India retaliated and how India reacted, and how the world is looking at it and today. So that shows also that India's heft is very different. And I must tell you that for quite some time now, India has stopped considering Pakistan as a very major factor, in its foreign policy calculations.
Absolutely.
But as long as they don't...
To stay on with this, we've just got the reaction of the Foreign Minister, S. Jaishankar, who said that India and Pakistan have today worked out an understanding on stoppage of firing and military action. India has consistently maintained a firm and an uncompromising stance against terrorism in all of its forms and manifestations, and it will continue to do so. This, of course, is the tweet that's been put out by S. Jaishankar, who said that India and Pakistan have worked out an understanding of the stoppage of firing and military action. India has consistently maintained a firm and an uncompromising stance against terror in all of its forms and manifestations, and it will continue to do so. In your assessment, the fact that India had been, for over the many years, had been saying that, look, there are these terror factories and terror outfits that Pakistani deep state and the Pakistani military has very actively cultivated and has used against India. Are we now changing the terms of engagement? The cost of backing these terror outfits is now going to be much more because, that seems to have been the very premise on the basis of which this ceasefire seems to have been announced.
Stance remains steady, and there has been no change in that. I mean, frankly, we have said that any peace is predicated on the basis that Pakistan desists from cross-border terrorism against India. I mean, that has been the only thing. Our problem with Pakistan is only their indulgence in cross-border terrorism. We have no other problem with Pakistan. Even on the issue of Kashmir, India had agreed to discuss it at the foreign secretary level. But it is Pakistan which always goes back because their justification or existence of their political-military system depends on enmity with India. I mean, that's true. So what can you do about it? I mean, so they have to learn to behave this time. This is hopefully these 3 or 4 days of skirmishes that have taken place across the border have shown them that India's potential is far greater than what they anticipated. Our response is going to be stern.
Colleague Molly Gambhir is, of course, joining us from the newsroom. Molly, this is huge. This was unexpected. The Pakistanis have now agreed to a ceasefire. We also just saw the tweet that was put out by the Indian Foreign Minister, where he said the issue of terror is what is at the heart of all of this. India's actions, Operation Sindoor, and subsequently were all to ensure that Pakistan does not play with its usual playbook of terror. Has Pakistan learned its lesson?
Right, Salil, let's just contextualize for our viewers the developments that have been trickling in over the last half hour or so. Very significant development, breakthrough. Remember, it all started with US President Donald Trump putting out that tweet, putting out that post, in fact, talking about the kind of negotiations that took place all through the night between India and Pakistan. And now we have the confirmation coming in from the Indian side about that ceasefire as well. But it's also important to remind our viewers about the statement that was given out by India just before we saw that statement from the Foreign Secretary of India categorically saying that any future act of terror will be taken as an act of war. So that again was a strong message given out by India before we saw the statement coming in from the Indian Foreign Secretary talking about how the two sides have agreed to stop firing and the ceasefire that has been announced between India and Pakistan. This of course comes right at a point where we were seeing Pakistan continuing with its escalatory moves, and India had said earlier on as well and maintained its stance that it was not interested in an escalation. Let's also lay out for our viewers that the fact that the Pahalgam terror attack resulted in India's strong response and retaliation, a very measured response to Operation Sindoor, which continued. And now we're seeing a point where it's culminated in the form of this ceasefire after US President Donald Trump declared that there were these talks that took place all through the night.
Absolutely, indeed, Molly. This is huge. This is pretty big because this has come out of the blue. This has come at a time when there was a clear going up the escalatory ladder that we were witnessing between India and Pakistan, and the fact that the two sides have now agreed upon a ceasefire, and just an hour before that, there were reports that came through from Government of India's sources that this of course is crucial, which said that any act of terror will be seen tantamount as an act of war. And now the two sides announcing the ceasefire agreement pretty much almost simultaneously. The Pakistani side did it first, and then there was, of course, this tweet by the American President Donald Trump. So the American mediation is pretty clear, and now there is this confirmation that's been put out by the Indian side as well. So we have on our screens this tweet by Dr. S. Jaishankar, where he makes it abundantly clear. The issue that India and Pakistan do not agree upon is this use of terror by the Pakistani deep state repeatedly over and over again. This is what Pakistan has been doing for the last several decades. It also has this very fancy term for it, this war by 1,000 cuts, to bleed India by 1,000 cuts and to wear India down. This is not going to happen, and this is not going to be acceptable to the Indian nation, which is why the Indian nation has been retaliating and retaliating hard, which is what we've witnessed over the course of the last few days. The two nations stood effectively on the brink of war, or should we say there was unofficially an unannounced war that the two nations were in fact engaged in. S. Jaishankar saying that India and Pakistan have agreed to a ceasefire. The truce was announced after 4 days of a conflict that was just going up the escalatory ladder. The Pakistani DGMO spoke for the Indian DGMO at about 3:35 p.m. and at 5 p.m. Indian Standard Time. That is when the ceasefire, of course, came into effect. And my colleague Siddhant Sibal is joining us with more updates on this. Siddhant, this is a ceasefire that's come straight out of the blue. Pakistan seems to be talking a completely different tune. What has changed here? What are the behind the scenes negotiations that have taken place? How is it that this ceasefire has been reached in this pretty dramatic manner?
Well, this is something very significant. We know that the situation was very bad. We know how India was able to thwart Pakistani attempts to create crisis. Pakistan indulged in every kind of propaganda. And now India has been able to not only thwart it, but send a clear message. India has put a deterrence in terms of the next terror attack. The Indian side has made it clear that next terror attack will be seen as an act of war, and this is something that is a clear message from New Delhi to Pakistan. So all in all, both sides are in touch. DGMO talks were happening, and they will again happen on Monday. So in that DGMO talks, we could see more engagement between the two sides.
Indeed, the DGMO talks will, of course, happen. Do continue to stay on with this, Siddhant. Molly, if I can bring you in here, this is very, very interesting. The American position was pretty ambivalent. Earlier, J.D. Vance had said that this conflict is none of the American business and the Americans will choose to stay out of it. But what we are witnessing, Marco Rubio's tweet makes it abundantly clear that the Americans were talking both to the Pakistanis and to the Indians, and the Americans seem to have succeeded in leaning in and using their leverage to make Pakistan see some sense. What do you make of this American position where America seems to be an active mediator in bringing about this ceasefire?
Right, Saleh, important to also contextualize for our viewers the kind of statements that have been coming in from the United States vis-a-vis the India-Pakistan conflict and the spiraling tensions we saw Marco Rubio earlier talking about and putting out that statement. We knew about the conversations that were taking place, that he was having with the Indian side and with the Pakistani side. But very important to underline the message that had come in earlier from Marco Rubio to Pakistan, where he said that Pakistan must stop the support to cross-border terror, must stop supporting terror. And that was a very categorical statement coming in. So while there were attempts from the US side, from Marco Rubio, to try and de-escalate the tensions, there were conversations taking place on part of the United States with both India and Pakistan. But the message from America was absolutely clear when it comes to terror. And Saleh, the point is that this is something that India has also maintained all throughout. It has zero tolerance on terror. We saw that position being reiterated through government sources as well, where we talked about how India has once again very strongly maintained that it has zero tolerance on terror, and any act of terror will be taken as an act of war. So we have to also talk about the fact that the US, in its conversations with Pakistan in the run-up to the announcement of the ceasefire, in public domain had also talked about how Pakistan must stop its support to terror. So, of course, we can go back to the entire period where we've seen the American intervention. We've seen the kind of relationship that the US has had with both with Pakistan as well. But at this point, I think it's important to underline that this is a breakthrough that's come in. We do know that there were those conversations that took place through the night, as Trump pointed out in that post as well. We do know that there were attempts being made all through from the United States side. And now that we have that confirmation of the ceasefire coming in, of course, it's coming at a crucial time, like we just mentioned, at a time when we were looking at both sides. Making it absolutely clear. India, of course, had made it clear that any escalation will be responded to in a befitting manner.
Absolutely, indeed, Molly. That, of course, seems to be the crux of this understanding, that India has made it clear that an act of terror perpetrated in India by Pakistan had been getting us all the updates all through the last few days, when the ceasefire violations had been happening from Pakistan, when there was intense shelling. Idris Loan, good evening to you. Tell us, what is the mood at this moment in the Kashmir Valley? What's happening there, considering that there is a ceasefire that has now come into effect, that's been mediated by the Americans and has been announced both by India and by Pakistan?
Well, absolutely, Saleh. There is a relief in the air. We can see people finally coming out of their houses. There's traffic back on the road, and people are basically happy all over Jammu and Kashmir. I can tell you that, especially the ones who live close to the line of control and international border. The last 15 days have been extremely difficult for the people living close to the line of control, and also not only line of control but the hinterland as well, because we've seen in the last 48 hours there have been so many blast sounds that the people have heard, and after that there has been so much of panic in the air. But finally, after people heard the news of ceasefire, we can see everyone is cheering up, and everyone is basically, there's a sigh of relief that everyone is feeling across Jammu and Kashmir at the moment. From the last 2 days, I can tell you that I did not see traffic on the roads. There were hardly any vehicular movement in Srinagar, but right now people in huge numbers have started coming out, and I can see that everybody is finally smiling, because it has been extremely difficult to at least 48 hours, when everybody, not only people living close to the line of control and international border, were going through a lot of panic, but also the people living in the cities like Jammu and Srinagar. We did see Jammu coming under attack of the drone attack, and there was a panic after that, and people were hardly coming out. Same is the case with Srinagar as well. People did not come out for so long now, and there were schools, institutions, everything was closed, everything was shut, and people were indoors. That was also the advisory that was given by the Jammu and Kashmir government in all the districts. But at the moment, Saleh, I can see that people are relieved that finally there has been ceasefire between the two countries, and finally people out on the streets.
An all-out war is the only option that the Pakistanis have going forward. But within 24 hours, that position has changed. What do you think has actually happened? How much of India's, hard military response to the Pakistani provocations has played a role? And how much have the Americans been able to lean in on the Pakistanis?
You know, before I get to that, Saleh, we of course have been outlining for our viewers the kind of statements that have been coming in from Pakistan all throughout in the run-up to this point. We also have been talking about the kind of nuclear rhetoric that's been coming in. And we saw Khwaja Asif also admitting on live television about the kind of support that Pakistan has been giving, supporting, training, funding terrorist groups. So that, of course, has been a major inflection point as far as this entire conflict goes, because we had that big admission coming in from Pakistan itself, something that the world had known. But the issue of terrorism that India has absolutely maintained a strong stance on. We've seen that reflecting also in the External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar's statement that came in just a short while back, talking about India's stance on terrorism and reiterating the same. But at the same time, we've seen how Pakistan, all throughout after the Pahalgam terror attack, India gave Pakistan a strong message. India also carried out the Operation Sindoor precision strikes on terror hubs in Pakistan. But the way things panned out post that and the kind of statements we saw coming in from Pakistan, they were hinting at escalation. And the nuclear rhetoric, remember, was also slammed at the UNSC closed-door meeting. So that again was a snub for Pakistan in a way that it was trying to drum up support but got a major setback in return. Now, it's reached a point where Pakistan, of course, had seen the kind of retaliation and the kind of response that India was giving. So that's the context and that's the background to which we're seeing things culminating at this point. We're seeing the ceasefire announcement coming in with all of that in the background. So it's very interesting, the kind of messaging that's been coming in from Pakistan all throughout, the kind of moves that it has made. And now India making its stance absolutely clear about terrorism and reiterating what this entire Operation Sindoor, remember, has been about. It's been a fight against terrorism, and that message comes out once again very clearly on part of New Delhi.
There is some breaking news that's in fact just come in, where Pakistan has reopened all airspace for all sorts of traffic activity effective immediately. This of course is what the Pakistani Aviation Authority has said. This is the breaking bit of news update that has just come in, where the Pakistanis have now reopened all airspace for all sorts of traffic effective immediately. So it remains to be seen as to how this, of course, plays out. The fact that Pakistan is now slipping back to a sense of normalcy so pretty quickly in the aftermath of the announcement of the ceasefire. One expects that the Pakistanis were expecting it. There were talks and negotiations that were happening all through the last night. This is what Marco Rubio has said. And the Indian side has now made it clear that this conflict was essentially about terror. The rules of engagement have now been changed. An act of terror by Pakistan and India will be taken as tantamount to an act of war. And the Pakistanis have now reopened their airspace for all sorts of traffic. This is pretty interesting in terms of how things have been progressing here. And my colleague Idris Lone is still with us from Srinagar. Idris, if I can bring you in here, the fact that, the Pakistanis have agreed to a ceasefire in this pretty dramatic manner, and the fact that there is now this moment, the guns have fallen silent at the border. One assumes that people along the line of control would have, of course, heaved a sigh of relief, because what had happened in the course of the last 4 odd days was almost in many ways unprecedented. We seem to have lost my colleague Idris Lone. We'll try and get him back online. But remember the scenes that we witnessed, these saturation drone attacks that Pakistan had resorted to, resulting in complete blackouts. The last time there were complete blackouts that we had witnessed was way back in 1971. That's almost 54 years ago. Not in the last 5 decades had India witnessed the kind of blackouts that we witnessed. During the Kargil war, that had been a limited conflict. But the manner...
This press briefing on Operation Sindoor and related developments, we have with us Commodore Ravi Nair, Colonel Sophia Qureshi, and Wing Commander Vyomika Singh to brief you. With that, I hand over the floor to Commodore Nair.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
As the Foreign Secretary had said, you're aware there's an understanding that has been reached to stop all military activities at sea, on the air and on the land. And the Indian Navy, Indian Army and the Indian Air Force have been instructed to adhere to this understanding. Since the tragic events at Pahalgam, you're aware that our responses have been measured and very responsible. Details of these have been shared with you over the past few days through our various press briefings. What has also happened is that there is a significant amount of misinformation that is being undertaken from the other side. And as a professional military organization, we thought it is also our duty to dispel those misinformation aspects, as also state the facts of the case as they stand. Towards that, I will now hand over to my colleague, Colonel Qureshi.
नमस्कार। अब मैं आपको पाकिस्तान की मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन कैंपेन के बारे में अवगत कराऊंगी। पहला, पाकिस्तान ने यह क्लेम किया कि उसने अपने JF-17 से हमारे S-400 व ब्रह्मोस मिसाइल बेस को नुकसान पहुंचाया, जो कि बिल्कुल गलत है। दूसरा, उसका ये भी मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन कैंपेन था कि हमारी एयरफील्ड, जो कि सिरसा, जम्मू, पठानकोट, बठिंडा, नलिया और भुज में है, ये उसका मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन भी बहुत गलत है। तीसरा, पाकिस्तान के मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन कैंपेन के मुताबिक हमारे एम्यूनिशन डंप्स जो चंडीगढ़ और बियास में है, उसका डैमेज हुआ, यह भी बिल्कुल गलत है। हमने आपको मॉर्निंग ब्रीफिंग में बताया था विद फैक्ट्स एंड फिगर के साथ कि ये सारी चीजें बिल्कुल सही सलामत हैं। अब मैं आपको बताना चाहती हूँ कि पाकिस्तान के एक प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में ये बात की गई थी कि उनके सीनियर मिलिट्री ऑफिसर्स, जो कि पूरी तरह से ये भ्रामक है और तथ्यों से दूर है, कि पाकिस्तान की ओर से ये झूठा आरोप भी लगाया जा रहा है कि भारतीय सेना ने मस्जिदों को नुकसान पहुंचाया। मैं इससे बिल्कुल स्पष्ट करना चाहती हूं कि इंडिया इज ए सेक्युलर नेशन और हमारी सेना भारत के कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल वैल्यूज की एक बहुत प्यारी झलक है। इंडियन आर्म फोर्सेस ने पाकिस्तान को बहुत भारी नुकसान पहुंचाया, उनके मिलिट्री इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर्स को, चाहे वो लैंड एसेट्स हो या फिर उनके एयर एसेट्स। यही नहीं, इंडियन आर्म फोर्सेस ने पाकिस्तान की एयरफील्ड स्कर्दू, जकोबाबाद, सरगोदा और बुलारी को बहुत नुकसान पहुंचाया। इसके अलावा पाकिस्तान के एयर डिफेंस सिस्टम, रडार सिस्टम, उनको भी एयर स्पेस में अनटेनेबल किया। यह भी बताना चाहती हूँ कि लाइन ऑफ कंट्रोल के पास पाकिस्तान के कमांड एंड कंट्रोल, लॉजिस्टिक इंस्टॉलेशन और उनके मिलिट्री इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर, मिलिट्री पर्सनल का इतना भारी नुकसान हुआ कि पाकिस्तान की ऑफेंसिव व डिफेंसिव कैपेबिलिटी को नष्ट कर दिया गया। अंत में मैं फिर से ये बात दोहराना चाहूंगी, इंडियन आर्म फोर्सेस पूरी तरह से तैयार है, सतर्क है और भारत की संप्रभुता और अखंडता की रक्षा के लिए पूरी तरह से कमिटेड है। धन्यवाद। जय हिंद।
Several attempts were made by Pakistan on spreading a misinformation campaign, as we have seen for the last few days. There were attempts made to say that our S-400 at a northern base was destroyed, which was completely false, and that it was destroyed by a JF-17. It was a false information. Also, that the BrahMos installation was attacked and it was destroyed was false. The destruction of airfields at Srinagar, Jammu, Pathankot, Bhuj, Nalia, etc. was also a false claim. The forward ammunition dump at Chandigarh and Beas are also fit and fine, and we showed you these in the photographs in the morning briefing today. Also, there was a certain different way of miscampaign that the Pakistan conducted by its press conferences, which was conducted in a manner which was completely misleading and devoid of facts. Pakistan has been spreading fabricated allegations that the Indian armed forces have targeted mosques. Let us make this very clear here that India is a secular nation and the Indian armed forces are a reflection of our constitutional values. We hold every place of worship of all faiths in the highest regard. Our operations have been aimed exclusively at terrorist camps and facilities being used for anti-India activities. No religious sites, I repeat, no religious sites have been targeted by the Indian armed forces. Over the past few days, as we have seen, Pakistan has suffered very heavy and unsustainable losses after it has given us an unprovoked attack on our installations. It has suffered losses in both land and air. There has been an extensive damage to the crucial Pakistani air bases like Skardu, Sargodha, Jacobabad, and Bholari. In addition, a loss of AD weapon system and radars made the defense of Pakistani airspace untenable. Across the line of control, extensive and precise damage to military infrastructure and command control centers and logistics installations. In addition to that, 2 military personnel had led to complete breakdown of its defensive and offensive capability and also Pakistani morale.
In conclusion, let me reiterate that whilst we will be adhering to the understanding that has been reached today, that is the Indian Army, the Indian Navy, and the Indian Air Force, we remain fully prepared and ever vigilant and committed to defending the sovereignty and integrity of the motherland. Every misadventure by Pakistan has been met with strength, and every future escalation will invite a decisive response. We remain fully operationally ready to launch whatever operations may be required in defense of the nation. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. With that, we come to the closure of this press briefing. Thank you very much.
All right, so that was the press briefing there, busting some of the misinformation that had been spread via social media handles about what was happening in the course of this war. And there, the Indian side now making it abundantly clear that a lot of the misinformation that had been peddled by the Pakistani handles simply did not happen. There were many issues that were, of course, highlighted and brought forth, because in the fog of war, remember, information too is something that is put out, which is done for what are known as psyops, and this is something that the Pakistani side had been resorting to. A number of different things had been said, and each of those has now been busted in that press briefing that we just heard there, stating that S-400 air defense system had been destroyed by a JF-17. This is what the Pakistanis have been peddling since morning, but that has been categorically said to be false, and a number of other issues were also raised that have all been completely debunked as propaganda that had been peddled in the aftermath of what had been happening since yesterday night. And to help us make sense of what's in fact been transpiring here, we are joined by Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, who's an Indian diplomat. Prabhu Dayal had in fact been a part of the Indian Foreign Service. He joined in 1976 and had served in a number of high-ranking positions, including as the Ambassador of Morocco and Ambassador of Kuwait, and he was also the Consul General in Dubai. Ambassador Dayal, this is a big moment. Now, India and Pakistan, who seem to be, on an escalatory ladder leading to an all-out war, have out of the blue announced a ceasefire that has been mediated by the Americans. In your assessment, what exactly has happened here, considering the heavy military activity that has been unfolding in the last 72 hours?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. You have rightly said that what we were witnessing was an escalatory trend. Now, from the very beginning, India had categorically said that it was targeting only the terrorist camps which were located in Pakistan, and we struck 9 sites. We had also said that our approach was non-escalatory, but if Pakistan escalates, we would retaliate. And that is precisely what happened. Pakistan tried to escalate the matter, and then we hit back very hard. Now, there are a few things which are very significant. Pakistan was not in a position to keep paying the high costs of an escalatory conflict. It is said that, you can fool some people for some time, but you can't fool all the people for all the time. Pakistan had been indulging in fake propaganda, but naturally, that fake propaganda was beginning to reveal its fakeness even to the Pakistanis. So it was very clear that the costs were becoming increasingly heavier for the Pakistanis. Secondly, there is no comparison between the might of the Indian state and that of Pakistan. Pakistan has been weakened a lot, firstly because of internal strife, and secondly because of a tottering economy. And you contrast that with the strength of India, and the Pakistanis knew that this was not a good thing for them to escalate the tensions and the conflict. So there were compelling reasons why the Pakistanis wanted to de-escalate, but perhaps they didn't know how to go about it. And significantly, the United States played a very good role in mediating between the two sides. President Trump, in fact, was the first person to announce on his social media platform that the United States had mediated all night long between the two sides, and the ceasefire had been agreed upon. So it was the United States which played a very important and a very significant role in the de-escalation and reaching the ceasefire. Now, I may also mention that the United States probably held out something for Pakistan as a bait.
Right.
Something which would attract them. Now, let us recall the fact that yesterday there was the IMF meeting. And despite our opposition, Pakistan was given a $1 billion package, which with promises for more to follow. Mm-hmm. Now, we were upset that this had happened. But the fact is that it appears that the Americans, who are really the leading country as far as the deliberations in the IMF are concerned, they held this out as a sop to the Pakistanis. We give you this, but you have to take the initiative for a ceasefire. And that is why the Pakistani DGMO called our side and proposed the ceasefire. The initiative came from the Pakistanis, but behind all that certainly was the role of the United States. So I am very happy that a ceasefire has happened. I am not prepared to say that the Pakistanis will change colors. No, because their tendency to harbor terrorists and to use covert terrorism against India is not going to change with this ceasefire. So as our side has made it very clear, we have to remain very vigilant. We have to remain on guard because the danger from Pakistan will continue. Their generals have been saying we'll bleed India by 1,000 cuts, and we are prepared for any mischief that they do. But for the moment, it's a good thing that the ceasefire has taken place. Let us remember that our Prime Minister himself has been saying it is not an era of war. The Prime Minister doesn't believe in war, but he had been provoked into taking action against the terrorist camps because of the terror attack on Pahalgam. So India never wanted to escalate. It is Pakistan which escalated. We have retaliated, and if they want a ceasefire, it's very good.
All right, very interesting.
Ambassador Dayal, if I can also ask you to comment on how crucially and clearly India has given out a strong message when it comes to zero tolerance on terror. Right before the announcement of the ceasefire, we saw that messaging coming in once again. India saying that an act of terror will be taken as an act of war. So all throughout, India has maintained that it wasn't interested in an escalation, while Pakistan maintained and continued with its escalatory and provocative moves. And now we've seen the reiteration of India's stance on terrorism coming in very clearly once again.
You're absolutely right. India had made it clear from the start that we would have zero tolerance for terror. In fact, the strike on the 9 sites in Pakistan was necessitated because of the terror attack in Pahalgam. So we never had the intention to engage in a conflict with Pakistan. Pakistan, however, bears the responsibility for having escalated the matter. It should have let the matter rest with the 9 strikes because these were in line with our policy to strike at terror. But Pakistan escalated and we only retaliated, as I said earlier. And if Pakistan has started feeling the heat and wants the ceasefire, it shows that it can't sustain a conflict. And this is a lesson which the Pakistani military establishment must draw. India's defenses are extremely well organized. We have shown that our S-400 missile air defense system is state-of-the-art, and we would be able to annul any effort from the part of the Pakistanis to attack us. So this message has gone across very, very clearly. Now, I must say that it has been made very clear by our side that we will remain on guard. And that is a message which goes across to Pakistan.
Right.
Don't try nonsense with us. We are on guard and we'll hit you again.
You know, Ambassador, it's interesting that you mentioned that, in the course of these negotiations, the Americans would have held out some carrot for the Pakistanis. Considering that Pakistan has been moving closer to China, is buying more and more of the Chinese weapons, the fact that Donald Trump, as soon as he entered office, gave $400 million for the Pakistanis to upgrade their old and aging F-16 fighter jets. In your assessment, what do you think is the carrot that has been dangled in front of the Pakistanis by the Americans to somehow make them see sense here?
Well, as I said earlier during our discussion, at the IMF meeting yesterday, Pakistan was given a $1 billion loan. And Pakistan really needs that loan if it has to tighten up its economy. And Pakistan's economy is in shambles. And I'm sure there were some negotiations behind the scenes because we were not happy that Pakistan got this loan from the IMF. But apparently, there were some behind-the-scenes negotiations. And I would be surprised if the Americans held out this bait to Pakistan that, look, you can get this loan, but stop this war with India. Because this war was not going to suit anybody except perhaps the Chinese. The Chinese want to use the Pakistanis to target India. In fact, that's the reason why they have been giving so much of weaponry to Pakistan. So there is no doubt, everybody knows what the Chinese game plan is. And the Americans also realize that a conflict between India and Pakistan, if it escalates, then the only people who would be smiling would be the Chinese, because that's what they want. So it's a good step that the Americans have taken to negotiate with the Pakistanis behind the scenes. It's a good development that the Pakistanis have realized that they should not prolong this conflict, that escalation is not in their interest, and that they have taken the step to call the Indian DGMO. I think that this is a good development, but we have to remain on guard.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned this war by 1,000 cuts that the Pakistanis have been waging against India when they carry out these terror attacks. But the fact is, the Pakistani government every time turns around and denies that, it or its military was directly involved. But this conflict, do you think that changes the rules of engagement between India and Pakistan with respect to terror attacks?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as that, because I was posted in Pakistan in the early 1980s. And at that time, their generals would speak to the young military cadets and try to tell them that their policy is to bleed India by 1,000 cuts. And that has remained their policy. Generals have come and gone, prime ministers have come and gone, presidents in Pakistan has come and gone. But this policy, which was enunciated by the Pakistani generals in the early 1980s, continues to be the truth till today. So I don't expect that there could be... So there were compelling reasons why the Pakistanis wanted to de-escalate, but perhaps they didn't know how to go about it. And significantly, the United States played a very good role in mediating between the two sides. President Trump, in fact, was the first person to announce on his social media platform that the United States had mediated all night long between the two sides. and the ceasefire had been agreed upon. So it was the United States which played a very important and a very significant role in the de-escalation and reaching the ceasefire. Now, I may also mention that the United States probably held out something for Pakistan as a bait.
Right.
Something which would attract them. Now, let us recall the fact that yesterday there was the IMF meeting. And despite our opposition, Pakistan was given a $1 billion package, which with promises for more to follow. Now, we were upset that this had happened. But the fact is that it appears that the Americans, who are really the leading country as far as the deliberations in the IMF are concerned, they held this out as a sop to the Pakistanis. We give you this, but you have to take the initiative for a ceasefire. And that is why the Pakistani DGMO called our side and proposed the ceasefire. The initiative came from the Pakistanis, but behind all that certainly was the role of the United States. So I am very happy that a ceasefire has happened. I am not prepared to say that the Pakistanis will change colors. No, because their tendency to harbor terrorists and to use covert terrorism against India is not going to change with this ceasefire. So as our side has made it very clear, we have to remain very vigilant. We have to remain on guard because the danger from Pakistan will continue. Their generals have been saying we'll bleed India by 1,000 cuts, and we are prepared for any mischief that they do. But for the moment, it's a good thing that the ceasefire has taken place. Let us remember that our Prime Minister himself has been saying it is not an era of war. The Prime Minister doesn't believe in war, but he had been provoked into taking action against the terrorist camps because of the terror attack on Pahalgam. So India never wanted to escalate. It is Pakistan which escalated. We have retaliated, and if they want a ceasefire, it's very good.
All right, very interesting.
Ambassador Dayal, if I can also ask you to comment on how crucially and clearly India has given out a strong message when it comes to zero tolerance on terror. Right before the announcement of the ceasefire, we saw that messaging coming in once again. India saying that an act of terror will be taken as an act of war. So all throughout, India has maintained that it wasn't interested in an escalation, while Pakistan maintained and continued with its escalatory and provocative moves. And now we've seen the reiteration of India's stance on terrorism coming in very clearly once again.
You're absolutely right. India had made it clear from the start that we would have zero tolerance for terror. In fact, the strike on the 9 sites in Pakistan was necessitated because of the terror attack in Pahalgam. So we never had the intention to engage in a conflict with Pakistan. Pakistan, however, bears the responsibility for having escalated the matter. It should have let the matter rest with the 9 strikes because these were in line with our policy to strike at terror. But Pakistan escalated. And we only retaliated, as I said earlier. And if Pakistan has started feeling the heat and wants the ceasefire, it shows that it can't sustain a conflict. And this is a lesson which the Pakistani military establishment must draw. India's defenses are extremely well organized. We have shown that our S-400 missile air defense system is state-of-the-art, and we would be able to annul any effort from the part of the Pakistanis to attack us. So this message has gone across very, very clearly. Now, I must say that it has been made very clear by our side that we will remain on guard. And that is a message which goes across to Pakistan. Don't try nonsense with us. We are on guard and we'll hit you again.
You know, Ambassador, it's interesting that you mentioned that, in the course of these negotiations, the Americans would have held out some carrot for the Pakistanis. Considering that Pakistan has been moving closer to China, is buying more and more of the Chinese weapons, the fact that Donald Trump, as soon as he entered office, gave $400 million for the Pakistanis to upgrade their old and aging F-16 fighter jets. In your assessment, what do you think is the carrot that has been dangled in front of the Pakistanis by the Americans to somehow make them see sense here?
Well, as I said earlier during our discussion, at the IMF meeting yesterday, Pakistan was given a $1 billion loan. And Pakistan really needs that loan if it has to tighten up its economy. And Pakistan's economy is in shambles. And I'm sure there were some negotiations behind the scenes, because we were not happy that Pakistan got this loan from the IMF. But apparently, there were some behind-the-scenes negotiations. And I would be surprised if the Americans held out this bait to Pakistan that, look, you can get this loan, but stop this war with India. Because this war was not going to suit anybody except perhaps the Chinese. You know, the Chinese want to use the Pakistanis to target India. In fact, that's the reason why they have been giving so much of weaponry to Pakistan. So there is no doubt, everybody knows what the Chinese game plan is. And the Americans also realize that a conflict between India and Pakistan, if it escalates, then the only people who would be smiling would be the Chinese, because that's what they want. So it's a good step that the Americans have taken to negotiate with the Pakistanis behind the scenes. It's a good development that the Pakistanis have realized that they should not prolong this conflict, that escalation is not in their interest, and that they have taken a step to call the Indian DGMO. I think that this is a good development, but we have to remain on guard.
Interesting. Now, you mentioned this war by 1,000 cuts that the Pakistanis have been waging against India when they carry out these terror attacks. But the fact is, the Pakistani government every time turns around and denies that, you know, it or its military was directly involved. But this conflict, do you think that changes the rules of engagement between India and Pakistan with respect to terror attacks?
Well, I wouldn't go so far as that, because I was posted in Pakistan in the early 1980s. And at that time, their generals would speak to the young military cadets and try to tell them that their policy is to bleed India by 1,000 cuts. And that has remained their policy. Generals have come and gone, prime ministers have come and gone, presidents in Pakistan has come and gone. But this policy, which was enunciated by the Pakistani generals in the early 1980s, continues to be the truth till today. So I don't expect that there could be a change in the gene of Pakistan. That gene continues to be anti-Indian, to somehow find a way to hurt India. And the nexus between the armed forces and the terrorist organizations is not going to end, because these terrorist organizations are used by Pakistan. So perhaps matters will be cool for some time. We will not see any outburst of activity. But whether I take it as an end to Pakistani policies in regard to terrorism, certainly not. Their policies will continue to be mischievous. There will continue to be links between the Pakistan military establishment, particularly the ISI and the terror outfits. The Pakistani authorities will continue to fund, finance, arm and train these terrorists in the hope that somehow or the other, some terrorist attack someday will be inflicted on India, and their objective of trying to bleed India by 1,000 cuts will continue to get fulfilled. I don't read much into the Pakistani disavowal of the situation. Pakistan's intentions remain the same, and I must say that India has to remain vigilant at all times.
So there is, as dusk begins to fall this evening in Srinagar, the fact that a ceasefire has now come into effect since 1700 hours, gives a sense of what is happening at this moment, because it is the people who are living at the line of control who are the worst affected in the flare-up of violence between India and Pakistan.
Well, absolutely, Saleh. There is a sigh of relief among the people of Jammu and Kashmir, especially the ones who live very close to the line of control. Last 2 days, we've seen people did not venture out of their homes. They stayed inside. And just after the ceasefire was announced, the people are back on the roads. I'd like my cameraman to pan and show you exactly what is the scene right now in Srinagar, where you can see people finally coming out on the roads. The shops have suddenly opened again, and the people who were for 2 days just inside their houses have started slowly coming out as well. It's a big relief for the people who live close to the line of control as well as international border. We've seen around 22 people died in the ceasefire violations in the last few days in Poonch, Rajouri as well as in the northern part of Kashmir. Around 60 people were injured who are still being treated at the hospitals across Jammu and Kashmir. So this is a big relief for those people actually, because they have to live through it. They have to face the consequences of it. Properties worth crores have been damaged all over northern part of Kashmir, whether it's Kupwara, Baramulla, Uri. For that matter, we saw ceasefire violation in Gurez sector today as well. On the other hand, we also saw ceasefire violation in Poonch, Rajouri and other parts of Kashmir Valley. So this is a big relief for those people who live close to the line of control. They have lost their houses. A lot of them have lost their properties, houses, cattle in the last few days. They will have to rebuild it again, but at least there is a sigh of relief that there is peace finally returning to Kashmir Valley, especially to the areas which are very close to the line of control and international border.
Absolutely, indeed, Idris. We see that some of the people are out on the streets. Now, considering the kind of tensions that have prevailed and considering the kind of blackouts that have been witnessed over the course of the last 3-4 days, at this moment, it's time for the people along the line of control to pick up the pieces. These ceasefire violations and a hot conflict between India and Pakistan affects the people, along the line of control and the people in the Kashmir Valley the most. So give us a sense of what the expectation of the people, the local people, is there of how this conflict needs to be resolved.
Well, Saleh, if we talk about the people especially living close to the line of control and international border, let me tell you, when the agreement between the Pakistan and India, the ceasefire agreement was renewed in 2021, after that time we did see peace returning to a line of control. Otherwise, it used to be hell living very close to the line of control for at least a decade. There would be ceasefire violations every second day, and they would not only attack the army installations but also the civilian population, and that was the case for decades. But after the agreement was renewed in 2021, we saw that there was finally peace returning to Kashmir Valley on the line of control as well as international border. On the other hand, when the Pahalgam attack happened, right after that, the ceasefire violations started again. It was every single night. From the last 15 consecutive nights, we've seen massive shelling going on from the Pakistani side. And it was back to that decade where what people were facing at that point of time. And it was a terrible, difficult time for the people who live close to the line of control. As I said, around 22 people have died in the last few days in this ceasefire shelling, and on the other hand 60 people were injured, were still being treated. Houses completely destroyed, burned down by the shelling that has taken place in the last few days. They've lost their farms, they've lost their cattle. That is what their livelihood basically is. And this has been a nightmare for those people living close to the line of control. Not only if we talk about the line of control and the international border, but even people living in cities. We did see the drone attack taking place in Jammu, where people after that have hardly come out of their homes. There is a lot of panic that people witnessed in the last 48 hours across Jammu and Kashmir. Srinagar also last night we saw how the drone attack took place, missile attack took place, and in the early morning at around 5:45 we saw those 3 big blasts taking place in Srinagar as well. So it has been a big relief that finally ceasefire has been announced between the two countries, and people in Jammu and Kashmir can breathe finally a sigh of relief for them.
Indeed, that of course is the big story at this moment. There is the people along the line of control, the people in the Kashmir Valley and also in all those regions who'd been affected because of this flare-up of tensions can, of course, now breathe a sigh of relief. This is a huge moment. My colleague Molly Gambhir, of course, joins me in the studio. Molly, this is big. The fact that the way things were just escalating, it did appear that things could just go out of hand, considering what had been happening for the last 48 hours. But the fact that the two nations have now come together, Pakistan seems to have seen some sense where the Pakistani foreign minister now says that Pakistan does not want war, clearly contradicting the defense minister from what he had said last night. It now remains to be seen as to how things, of course, proceed from here. But what is clear is that the terms of engagement on terror attacks, that seems to have changed. And this could be a new normal that we're now looking at, considering the fact that India has made it pretty clear that any act of terror by the Pakistanis in future will be seen as an act of war.
Indeed, and India has made its position, its message, its stance absolutely clear when it comes to zero tolerance on terror. In fact, that strong message that came in before the announcement of the ceasefire, where India said that an act of terror will be taken as an act of war. And then we saw the announcement of the ceasefire coming in through U.S. mediation. First of all, we had that post put out by Donald Trump talking about how the mediation continued through the night. This, of course, coming at a very crucial point, as we've been outlining for our viewers, where Pakistan was continuing with its escalatory moves while India had maintained that while it is not interested in an escalation, it will respond befittingly to Pakistan's moves, and so it did. We've seen how on the ground as well, we've been getting you a sense of the preparedness on part of India, and how Pakistan, on the other hand, had been resorting to those escalatory moves. A breakthrough now that's come in at a very significant juncture, where India and Pakistan have agreed to a ceasefire. Going back across now to our correspondent Idris Lone, who's been tracking those developments on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir. Idris, if you've had a chance to speak to any of the locals at this point, just to get in a sense of the reactions and tell us more about the mood on the ground. This, of course, coming at a time when we've been constantly, through you, getting those updates of what the mood was like in parts of Jammu and Kashmir, where we've seen the drone attacks as well taking place on Pakistan, and last night as well, that second consecutive night of the Pakistani aggression, as a result of which we've seen the kind of impact on the ground as well. But this, of course, is a moment that comes as you've been saying, a huge sigh of relief for the people on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir specifically.
Well, absolutely, Molly. Right now, people back out on the street. We are right now in Lal Chowk. As you can see, this is the Gantaga, the clock tower place, where people are finally out. This has been completely deserted in the last 2 days. Nobody out on the streets. But now we see people, children, finally laughing, smiling and coming out on the streets. The last 48 hours have been extremely difficult for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. We've seen the panic that was created because of the drone attacks that were taking place all across Jammu and Kashmir, whether it was the Jammu city or whether it was Srinagar that saw these drone attacks in the early morning today. There were multiple blasts that took place across Srinagar city also. So there was a lot of panic among the people from the last 48 hours. We've seen, Molly, in the last few days, around 22 people have died during the shelling that took place from across the border. Around 60 people were injured. They're still being treated at different hospitals across Jammu and Kashmir. On the other hand, we've just got to know that the former Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, Mehbooba Mufti, has welcomed the ceasefire between the two countries. Umar Abdullah, the current Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, has also welcomed this step and said this is a great initiative by both the countries. This is exactly what the people of Jammu and Kashmir needed. We've seen the people who live very close to the line of control and international border have basically been facing and bearing the brunt of all the violence, the kind of violence that we've seen in the last 48 hours, especially heavy mortar shelling coming from across the border, not only attacking the army installations, security forces installations or bunkers or posts, but also the houses of the civilians. We've seen how the commercial properties, the cattle, the farms, everything has been destroyed in the places very close to the line of control and international border, and it will take them a long time to rebuild their houses, to rebuild their lives again. But nevertheless, it is a great news for all of them as well, so that they can actually return back to their houses.
Indeed, it is what a strong contrast those images are from last night itself, when Jammu witnessed that blackout and the Pakistani aggression had continued, and now we've seen those people out and about on the streets. Stay with me, Idris. This is a crucial meeting underway at Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's residence. In fact, the NSA Ajit Doval meeting Prime Minister Modi at his residence. The External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Foreign Secretary, also have arrived at the Prime Minister's residence. The CDS, the Army Chief, Air Force Chief, Navy Chief also present in that meeting. This taking place a short while after the announcement of the ceasefire. We have been telling you about the statement that has been coming in about the kind of mediation that took place on part of the United States to make this ceasefire come in at a very crucial time, when we had seen the kind of situation that was unfolding as far as the India-Pakistan tensions and the conflict is concerned. This crucial meeting that is now underway at the Indian Prime Minister's residence after the announcement of the ceasefire between India and Pakistan. Let's also talk about the messaging that's come in from India before the announcement of the ceasefire, where it has reiterated its zero tolerance on terror, and through Indian government sources, that messaging, that statement that came in before the announcement of the ceasefire about how an act of terror will be taken as an act of war. And a while after that, just a short while after that, we saw the announcement of the ceasefire coming in with the Indian Foreign Secretary announcing that India has agreed to ceasefire. But all throughout, India's messaging has been absolutely clear. We also need to highlight that India has maintained categorically all throughout, amid those tensions as well, that it is not interested in an escalation. And we have been telling you about what things have looked like today as well, earlier in the run-up to the ceasefire. And a reaction coming in also from the Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Omar Abdullah, welcoming the ceasefire. We have been telling you about what things are looking like on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir, where our correspondent Idris Lone has been telling us more about what a sigh of relief this is, and how the mood is shifting on the ground in Jammu and Kashmir, which of course has undergone and witnessed a tense period as a result of